Hello, today I am going to discuss a very important topic of modern Indian history, that is Simon Commission and Nehru Report. The Indian Statutory Commission was a group of 7 British members of Parliament of United Kingdom under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon, assisted by Clement Attlee. The Simon Commission arrived in British-occupied India in 1928 to study constitutional reform in Britain's most important colonial dependency. The Indian Statutory Commission was a group of 7 British members of Parliament of United Kingdom. The Commission arrived in British-occupied India in 1928 to study constitutional reforms in Britain's most important colonial dependency. It was commonly referred to as the Simon Commission, after its chairman, Sir John Simon. One of its members was Clement Attlee, who became committed to Indian independence by 1934 and achieved that goal as Prime Minister in 1947 in the granting of independence to India and Pakistan. At the time of introducing the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, the British government declared that a commission would be sent to India after 10 years to examine the effects and operations of the constitutional reforms and to suggest more reforms for India. The members of this Simon Commission were Sir John Simon, Clement Attlee, Harry Levy Lawson, Edward Cadogan, Vernon Hudson, George Lane Fox, Donald Howard. They are the members of this Simon Commission. The background of this commission was like this. The Government of India Act 1919 had introduced the system of diarchy to govern the provinces of British India. The Indian public clamored for revision of this form of government, and the Government of India Act 1919 itself stated that a commission would be appointed after 10 years to investigate the progress of the governance scheme and suggest new steps for reforms. In the late 1920s, the Conservative government, then in power in Britain, feared imminent electoral defeat at the hands of the Labour Party, and also feared the effects of the conquest, transfer of control of India to such an inexperienced body. Hence, it appointed 7 MPs to constitute the promised commission to examine the state of Indian constitutional affairs. Some people in India were outraged and insulted that the Simon Commission, which was to determine the future of India, did not include a single Indian member. The Indian National Congress, at its December 1927 meeting in Madras, resolved to boycott the commission and challenged Lord Birkenhead, the Secretary of State for India, to draft a constitution that would be acceptable to the Indian populace a faction of the Muslim League led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah also decided to boycott the commission. But however, opinion was divided, with support for cooperation coming from some members of the Muslim League and also from Hindus and members of the Central Sikh League. An All India Committee for Cooperation with the Simon Commission was established by the Council of India and by selection of the Viceroy Lord Irwin. The members of the committee were C. Sadananda Nayak as its chairman, Arthur Froome, Nawab Ali Khan, Shivdev Singh Oberoi, Zulfikar Ali Khan, Hari Singh Gaur, Abdullah Al Manum Sravati, Kikabhai Premchand, and M.C. Raja. In Burma, present Myanmar, which was included in terms of reference of the Simon Commission, there was strong suspicion either that Burma's unpopular union with India would continue or that the constitution recommended for Burma by the Commission would be less generous than that chosen for India. These suspicions resulted in tension and violence in Burma, leading to the rebellion of Saya Shan. Almost immediately with its arrival in Bombay on 3rd February 1928, the Simon Commission was confronted by throngs of protesters. A strike began and many people turned out to greet the Commission with black flags. Similar protests occurred in every major Indian city that the 7 British MPs visited. One protest against the Simon Commission became infamous. On 30th October 1928, the Commission arrived in Lahore, where it was met by protesters waving black flag. The protest was led by Indian nationalist leader Lala Lajpat Rai, who had moved a resolution against the Commission in the Legislative Assembly of Punjab in February 1928. In order to make way for the Commission, the local police force began beating protesters, in which Lala Lajpat Rai was critically injured and later succumbed to his injuries on 17th November 1928. Then after this, the Commission published its 2-volume report in May 1930. It proposed the abolition of diarchy and the establishment of representative government in the province. It also recommended that separate communal electorates be retained, but only until tensions between Hindus and Muslims had died down. In September 1928, ahead of the Commission's release, Motilal Nehru presented his Nehru report to counter its charges that Indians could not find a constitutional consensus among themselves. This report advocated that India be given dominion status of complete internal self-government. Nothing that educated Indians opposed the Commission, and also that communal tensions had increased instead of decreased. The British government had opted for another method of dealing with the constitutional issues of India. Before the publication of the report, the British government stated that Indian opinion would henceforth be taken into account and that the natural outcome of the constitutional process would be dominion status for India. The outcome of the Simon Commission was the Government of India Act 1935, which called for responsible, in quote, government at the provincial level in India, but not at the national level. That is, a government responsible to the Indian community rather than London. It is the basis of many parts of the Indian Constitution. In 1937, the first elections were held in the provinces, resulting in Congress governments being returned in almost all provinces. Clement Attlee was deeply moved by his experience on the commission and endorsed the final report. But however, by 1933, he argued that British rule was alien to India and was unable to make the social and economic reforms necessary for India's progress. He became the British leader most sympathetic to Indian independence, preparing him for his role in deciding on independence in 1947. The Simon Commission was opposed primarily because it did not have any Indian representation in the assemblies. The government of India had appointed this commission in 1927. The goal of the Simon Commission was to give an account of how the Indian Constitution was working. That's why this commission was failed. The Simon Commission, the group appointed in November 1927 by the British Conservative government under Stanley Baldwin to report on the working of the Indian Constitution established by the Government of India Act 1990. Hence, the Nehru report of 28 to 30 August 1928 was a memorandum outlining a proposed new dominion status constitution for India. It was prepared by a committee of the All Parties Conference chaired by Motilal Nehru, with his son Jawaharlal Nehru acting as secretary. The Nehru report of 28 to 30th August 1928 was a memorandum. Clear. The final report was signed by Motilal Nehru, Ali Imam, Tej Bahadur Sapru, Madhav Srihari Ani, Mangal Singh, Shoaib Qureshi, Subhash Chandra Bose, and G.R. Pradhan. Qureshi disagreed with some of the recommendations. British policy until almost the end of the Raj was that the timing and nature of Indian constitutional development was to be decided exclusively by the British Parliament, but it was assumed that Indians would be consulted as appropriate. This was formally stated in the Government of India Act 1919, right of Indians to frame their own constitution only in the 1942 Cripps Declaration. Indian unhappiness with this paternal approach was described by the Monam Mehruta. All political parties in India in the 20s recognized the legislative supremacy of the imperial parliament. Even the Congress, which took its stand on the principle of self-determination, bowed to the sovereign. This was the first attempt by Indians to draft a new constitution, a non-official effort too, made by Mistress Besant and a few of her Indian friends. Most of the leaders were rather cool towards her project, but it was somewhat revised by the so-called All Parties Conference, which met at Delhi in January-February 1925 and was formally approved by a convention held at Kanpur in April. It was drafted as a statute and introduced in the House of Commons by Mr. George Lansbury in December 9, 1925, under the title The Commonwealth of Indian Bill. The Commonwealth of Indian Bill. The bill proposed to confer upon India at once the full status of a dominion, subject to certain temporary reservations. The Viceroy, as the representative of the King Emperor was to have complete charge of military and naval forces and foreign relations until the Indian Parliament by its own act should signify its readiness to assume control. Any step taken by the Indian Parliament concerning the Indian states must have the previous approval of the Viceroy. There was a Bill of Rights which included, among other things, guarantees of personal liberty, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, and equality of sex. The schemes did not arouse any popular enthusiasm, partly perhaps because it was not really an Indian product, but mainly because of the negative character of the nationalist movement. The leaders were more interested in opposing the existing system than they were in preparing a constructive alternatives. The rejection by Indian leaders of the all-white Simon Commission led Lord Birkenhead, the Secretary of State for India, to make a speech in the House of Lords in which he challenged the Indians to draft a constitution, implying that they could not produce one that would be widely acceptable among the leaders of the various Indian communities. In the words of Campbell, in quote, "I am entirely in favor," wrote to, of inducing the malcontents to produce their own proposals. For in the first place, I believe them to be quite incapable of surmounting the constitutional and constructive difficulties involved. In the second, if these were overcome, I believe that a unity which can only survive in an atmosphere of generalization would disappear at once. The report says the constitution outlined by the Nehru report was for Indian enjoying dominion status within the British Commonwealth. Some of the important elements of the report, like the eventual Government of India Act 1935, it contained a Bill of Rights. All power of government and all authority, legislative, executive, and judicial, are derived from the people, and the same shall be exercised through organizations established by or under and in accord with this Constitution. There shall be no state relation. Men and women shall have equal rights as citizens. There should be federal form of government with residuary powers vested in center. Like some scholars such as Moore in 1988 considered the Nehru report proposal as essentially unitary rather than federal. It included a description of the machinery of government, including a proposal for the creation of Supreme Court and a suggestion that the province should be linguistically determined. It did not provide for separate electorates for any community or weightage for minorities. Both of these were liberally provided in the eventual Government of India Act 1935. However, it did allow for the reservation of minority seats in the provinces having a minorities of at least 10%, but this was to be in strict proportion to the size of the community. The language of the union shall be Indian, which may be written either in Devanagari, Hindi, Sanskrit, Telugu, Kannada, Marathi, Gujarati, Bengali, Tamil in character. The use of the English language shall be permitted. The Nehru report, along with that of the Simon Commission, was available to participants in 3 Indian Roundtable Conference 1930-32. However, the Government of India Act 1935 owes much to the Simon Commission report and little, if anything, to the Nehru report. The Muslim League's reaction to the Nehru report, like with a few exceptions, League leaders rejected the Nehru proposals. In reaction, Muhammad Ali Jinnah drafted his 14 points in 1929, which became the core demands the Muslim community put forward as the price of their participating in an independent, united India. Their main objective were separate electorates and weightage. In 1916, Congress Muslim League Agreement Lucknow Pact provided these to the Muslim community, whereas they were rejected by the Nehru report. Residuary powers, the Muslims realized that while they would be a majority in the province of the northeast and northwest of India, and hence would control their provincial legislature, they would always be a minority at the center. Thus they demanded, contra the Nehru report, that residuary powers go to the provinces. According to Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the committee has adopted fascist and narrow-minded policy to ruin the political future of the Muslims. I regret to declare that the report is extremely ambiguous and does not deserve to be implemented. The inability of the Congress to consider these points must be considered a major factor in the eventual partition of India. The main points, like as an answer to Lord Birkenhead's challenge, an all-parties conference met in February 1928 and appointed a subcommittee under the chairmanship of Motilal Nehru to draft a constitution. This was the first major attempt by the Indians to draft a constitutional framework for the country. The committee included Tej Bahadur Sapru, Subhash Chandra Bose, M.S. Ani, Mangal Singh, Ali Imam, Shoaib Qureshi, G.R. Pradhan as its member. The report was finalized by the August 1928. The recommendations of the Nehru Committee was unanimous except in one respect. While the majority favored the dominion status as the basis of the constitution, a section of it wanted complete independence as the basis, with the majority sanction giving the latter section liberty of action. The main recommendations of the Nehru report confined itself to British India, as it envisaged the future link-up of British India with the princely states on a federal basis for the dominion it recommended. Dominion status of lines of self-governing dominions as the form of government desired by Indians. Rejection of separate electorates, which had been the basis of constitutional reforms so far. Instead, a demand for joint electorates with reservation of seats for Muslims at the center and in provinces where they were in minority, and not in those where Muslims were in majority, such as Punjab and Bengal, in proportion to the Muslim population there with the right to contest additional seats. These are some of the ideas, thoughts, discussions on Simon Commission and Nehru report. Thank you for listening to me.